Another one has to do with accountability. Another one has to do with marketing and sales. And always, there's one about removing the CEO as the bottleneck. And there's no judgment. It's just inherent. Not all entrepreneurs are great at running businesses. People who are wired for running businesses are great at running businesses. And that's a very different distinction. So the CEO profile is uniquely different from a COO profile. I mean, it's an identity change, right? They need to be a different CEO going forward. I mean, really, it's basically going from business owner to CEO. And in my opinion, business owners are not the ones to be running their own companies. That can feel like a big shift. And they realize, like, I didn't even know that you guys existed. Like, this idea of a COO is kind of like, you know, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This sounds like too good to be true.
Hey, just before we jump into the show, got a little favor to ask you. If you enjoy listening to our podcast, please make sure you are subscribed on the platform of your choice. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, whatever platform that might be. The more people who subscribe, the more we give you an opportunity to have some great takeaways. It doesn't take you too long, and it would be a great help to us to help us grow the show. For now, that's it. Enjoy today's recording. Good morning, Derek. Thank you very much for joining us today on the Business Takeaway podcast. Do you want to give a bit of a background and information on who you are and a bit of your background?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Happy to be here. My name is Derek Fredrickson. I'm the founder and CEO of the COO Solution. We provide fractional COOs, or what I like to call second-in-command operators, for scaling companies at multiple 7 and multiple 8 figures. I've been doing COO work for the better half of 15 years. I started out actually as the operator, second in command for my wife's business coaching company. That's how I got introduced to the space. And then I stepped out of the day-to-day of running of that multiple 7-figure company about 7 years ago and started to offer fractional, meaning part-time, COO, chief operating officer work for other companies that were scaling at multiple 7 figures. As the fractional model, as you know, there's only so much of you that goes around. So I kind of stepped out of the day-to-day of the operator role and kind of put off my COO hat, put on my CEO hat, and then launched my company, the COO Solution, about 2 years ago. And we have a number of clients in a variety of different industries, but we provide basically a boots on the ground model that allows the founder, CEO, to get out of the bottleneck in the business, to kind of free them up to focus on the future and the vision. And we take care of running of the day-to-day, people in the right seats, accountability structures, systems, processes, all the things that business owners want and need in a scaling company, but they don't want to be the one to do it. That's what we provide. So that's a little bit about us and what I do.
I was going to ask, do you have a CEO for your fractional CEO for your own company where you're the CEO, right?
Of course I do. Got to walk my talk, right? Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And like when you step into a business as a fractional CEO, so a lot of these businesses scaling, as you said, you talked about businesses that scale 7, 8 times, right? What are you providing to them and going in and looking for as that person? What are you go, right, this is the thing, the checklist of my day one. What do I go and look for in that?
Yeah. It always depends. I think one of the first things that we do with the business owner that we talk about is I ask them, the question is, what is their North Star? Meaning, what is the real why of what you are trying to accomplish? They may want to focus on 2X or 5X or 10X or exit or sale, or maybe sometimes they just don't want to work so damn hard in the business that they've been doing for so long. And they know that they want change, right? I'm sure you've heard the expression, what got them here is not going to get them there. So in order to change, they have to be willing to change. So we start with the North Star because that's usually the motivator and it gets them a bit excited. And part of what we do at an initial level is we know what they want to do in order to grow and scale, right? We identify that. These are the strategies. These are the goals. These are the projects, the rocks, the things that are going to move the needle. But equally as so, and in some cases even more so than focusing on what they need to do to grow and scale, we focus on how you're doing what you're doing. Because the how you're doing are the things that actually are the building blocks to support the scale. The structure, the systems, the processes, the SOPs, the operations manager, operations manuals, the project management systems, the culture of accountability. We focus on that because usually the CEO is too bogged down in the day-to-day to focus on the how. The how doesn't excite them. What excites them is looking at the bigger future. The team is already focused on trying to keep up with the day-to-day as it is. So nobody really has the ability to look at the business operationally through a different lens and also objectively. So when we come in, we assess we understand, we don't shake the tree of the business to, get things to fall, but we're bringing things to the discussion that are going to change things operationally and how that works, from the strategy all the way down to the day-to-day execution. But it starts with the why with the founder, to get them really understanding of where we want to go and what it looks like. And then that strategic plan is basically the roadmap of how we're going to execute that month in and month out. So,
and when you go in, do many of the founders you talk to know what they're going to expect from you? That's not a discredit to you, right? That's a more like they come in and go, we've got this problem, Derek, you come in and solve it. We think this is the problem. You go in, well, you've got that problem, but hang on, you need to look at that. Do you know what I mean? Is that something you uncover quite a lot?
Yeah, I think there are sometimes big red flags, right? I just spoke to 2 potential clients today, and they were on opposite sides of the spectrum. One did not have a marketing and sales problem. They had an operational delivery and finance problem. The other potential client, completely the opposite. They didn't have a marketing and sales problem, or it was the opposite. I remember which one I just said, but you get the idea. It kind of depends. But part of it as well is, really assessing what the business owner is involved with and what do they want to be doing, right? And in some cases, they like to be in the delivery. They like to be involved in some of the aspects of the day-to-day, but they don't want to be the one that's involved in all of that. So we do a little bit of, whether it's called an activity inventory or a bit of a time audit, just to really see where their time is going. But part of it also is we are stepping in to open the hood of the business to ask the questions. What's working? Great. Let's do more of that. And why is that working? What's not working? Why not? And who owns the fact that that's not working, and what needs to change, update, remove, or improve in order for that? And that could be in any spectrum of the business. That could be marketing, finance, operations, delivery, sales, the founder, the team, whatever that might be. So part of that is just kind of getting under the surface of the business to see what's going on. And in some cases, the founders aren't really aware of what's really going on because they're not looking at it through that lens. They're looking at the lens from their own perspective. So there's a bit of a wake-up call in some cases, and a bit of I don't want to, divulge everything that might be a bit of a mess. But again, we don't judge. This is not about that. But for the clients that we work with, they know that, again, things need to change. And they're not wired. We do assessments. They're not wired to initiate that type of change. They're wired to think about the bigger future and kind of make up the big idea. But they need somebody to be the one that's going to land the plane and then actually go make it happen. That's what a COO actually does.
Yeah, and you certainly I've worked with founders who are brilliant visionaries, but couldn't organize themselves out of a paper bag, as I would say. Do you know what I mean? And that's a problem where you get into and you go, you need somebody who's here to sort it out. When you go into these businesses, is there 3 or 4 traits you look for and go, I've seen this before, is there a common thing you see?
Yeah. So like I said, we do a couple of assessments to begin with, and there is a profile, I think, for most entrepreneurs, most business owners, not all, but a majority of them are typically what I describe as big vision thinkers, right? They're big risk takers. They think outside the box. They look more out and long as opposed to in and short. Right? That's just their mindset. That's how they got started. They're the ones that are, initiating things. They're kind of I have this idea and I'm passionate about it for whatever that reason might be. I want to create a business around it. And they got to the point where the business kind of consumed the passion because they may not be a great operator of a business. Not all entrepreneurs are great at running businesses. People who are wired for running businesses are great at running businesses. And that's a very different distinction. So the CEO profile is uniquely different from a COO profile. And the CEO is not only just the vision mindset, but they love to start things. They don't love to finish things, right? And so they don't think in terms of kind of landing the plane. They can get something to maybe 60, 70%. This is no judgment to the entrepreneur audience that's listening. They can get it to 60 to 70%. But at that point, their motivation, excitement, and energy starts to teeter out to get it to 100. So that's where the operator comes in to be able to cascade that and finish things to completion. Because why? The entrepreneur usually is now focused on something else. They've started a new thing. They've got a new idea. They're creating something else because it's exciting, it's new, it's different. And that has kind of lost its luster when it gets to about 60 to 70%. I think the other profile, I'm trying to think if there's a third profile, at least in the clients and the companies that we work with, they know that they need this type of support, right? A COO is a strategic operational shift in how you're running your company. This is not another transactional hire. So they know that they need this type of change because the alternative is just doing more of what they're doing. And usually at that point, they've already have pushed the boulder of scaling their business up the hill as much as they can, and it's like damn too heavy to keep it going. So they kind of realize like I need to like let the boulder down and get somebody else to help me push it up, or I'm just going to stay here because I can't keep doing it. And so they know they need this type of support. They know they need this type of change, and it's going to require work, right? This is not like something that just, oh, we've hired Susie in marketing and we've got Bob in operations. It's like, no, we've got somebody who's actually now running the business with us and doing things in a much more positively minded, strategic, directional type of way. So
you mentioned the skills of a CEO. What's the skills of a COO? I mean, obviously, you're going to say your skill set and what your business does, but as a good CEO, what do you need to be? What do you need to be able to offer? Because it's a broad role to take on.
Sure.
You could be, as you said, you could be in sales, finance, marketing, operations.
Yeah.
What do you need?
Yeah. So I think the profile of the COO was very different from the profile of the CEO. They're complementary. They're a little bit of, yin and yang, if you will. So as an example, entrepreneurs like to start things. Operators like to finish things. They are the kite. They are the string to the entrepreneurial kite, right? So sometimes they are, they're wired to execute. They love to think in process and structure and frameworks and everything else, but they have to kind of go both ways. They have to kind of live in the strategy box, if you will. Like they have to be that trusted thought partner to the visionary entrepreneur, kind of sit on the shoulder of the entrepreneur and let them ideate, let them create, and just let them like throw spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. But at the end of the day, when something sticks, a properly minded operator COO is going to take that and go and make that happen because they see things in frameworks and A to Z. They see things all the way through to completion. And again, we use assessments and profiles to figure out how they're wired to take action, what their natural strengths are. So CEOs are generally very, very risk diverse, meaning like they're risk takers. COOs are more about stabilization. Not to say like they're mitigating risk, but they're creating the container, the structure, and the environment for things to happen that lets the entrepreneur be very entrepreneurial, right? A little bit of bright, shiny object. I'm going here. We're starting that. That's great. You need that to be in the mindset of the entrepreneur because that's what excites them. That's what gives them confidence and clarity. But they also need to have the trust and confidence that somebody's going to land the plane and actually make things happen. And that's what that operator is. They're also, I'll just say one more thing. In our experience, the best COOs are not consultants. I know that there are some COOs that are consultants. That's not our model. They're the ones that like, you should do this and you should do that, but they kind of step away from the execution. That's not us. But we're also not babysitters. We're not stepping into a company and saying, checking on this and did you do that and did you do this? No. It's this culture that happens in the organization. So I often say they show up batteries included, right? And they're not asking, Ben, what do you want me to do to help you scale your business? They're coming in and saying, Ben, this is what I think we need to be doing to scale your business. So they're very much in that kind of direction to kind of counter and balance what the CEO is doing and sometimes doing on their own. So they are that partner in that way.
And how do you find the CEOs take to it? Because most of these CEOs you probably work with are founder operators and they've scaled their business. And then they've got somebody coming in from the outside who's perhaps not lived that dream, lived that world that they've had for 10, 5, 10, 15, whatever years. How do they take to that adapting?
Yeah, I think for us, in the model that we provide, all of the CEOs that are on my team are entrepreneurs by nature, meaning they are small business owners as well. And I know that not about our model and what that looks like, but I think because they have that perspective and they have that mindset, they understand the entrepreneurial journey, right? There are high highs and there are low lows. There's nothing linear. And so there's the ability to kind of to communicate at that level with the CEO and confide in them and give them the space to share. I mean, there's the hard skills, there's the strategy, the tactics, and there's the soft skills to really kind of, go into a mindset space and coach them and consult them in what needs to happen in that way. I think the other thing that often happens is just being able to provide the space for the CEO to realize that, yeah, maybe the way they've been running their business for whatever period of years has got them to that point with a lot of things mostly operationally up in here, right? Like most companies in the beginning that we've worked with are, so tell me how this works. Well, I do this, and if I get stuck, I ask Bob. Bob's the business owner, right? Why? Because Bob knows, and I was trained by Bob, and this is just how we do what we do, and that's how we've always done what we've done. And so that doesn't really change because people don't have the time or the capacity or asking the questions about how to do things in a different way. And a lot of it lives up here, right? So where's the SOP? It's up here. Where's our operations manual? Up here. How do we onboard clients? Up here. But then how do we cascade that? And Bob doesn't have the time to put that down into a structured system or a framework or a run book that the rest of the team can provide, because Bob's at a conference and then he's going out to network with his clients and he's always on the phone doing delivery. So it's kind of like living in this place and just being able to sometimes kind of blurt it out and capture it and then start to build a structure. In the beginning, when we do this work, we do our best to do it for them, right? So they can see how things could be done in a different way. And then over a period of time, we want to do it with them so we can get their buy-in, we can get their inclusion, they take more ownership and responsibility, and then eventually we want them to do it by themselves. So they really understand the playbook and the runway of how to do things from the CEO all the way down to the day-to-day team.
We talked a lot about the CEO, everything with the CEO. How many times do you go in and actually the problem isn't operations, it's nothing else, it's actually the CEO's the problem?
Always. I would be lying if that wasn't the case. They're not the sole problem, right? One of the things that we do when we work with clients is we kind of identify, our first sprint is 90 days. And we look at what are the things that need to shift, call them projects, goals, objectives, whatever, in the first 90 days in order to have like really, really good momentum and traction and progress. Inevitably, we always have 5. Inevitably, there's always one that has to do with team. Another one that has to do with kind of operations, process, systems, et cetera. Another one has to do with accountability. Another one has to do with marketing and sales. And always, there's one about removing the CEO as the bottleneck. And there's no judgment. It's just inherent. And they realize that through that process because, like, listen, you've painted the picture of where you want to go. You've told us your North Star. We've given you the roadmap of what it's going to take to get there. And it is not by CEO Bob doing more. It's actually by Bob doing less. So one of the things we say is actually, Bob, less doing, more thinking. Because the more you think, the more you ideate, the more you play in your entrepreneurial visionary box, the more the company will scale and grow. Not by you tinkering in the day-to-day, because that drains your energy. And frankly, you stink at it. So why are you even involved in the first place? I'm being very direct, but I'm saying that in kind of a cheeky way to have them realize that, they are not the only path to scale. And part of that is actually them stepping out, trusting, and relying on somebody that is wired, that has the strengths to run a business with them, or in some cases for them. So I think inevitably it always has to do with the founder in some way or another. And there's also no such thing as like founder bottleneck utopia, right? I mean, they may be out of one area, but they're still in the delivery, right? Guess what? You can scale that to a certain point when you're in the delivery, but then if we're going to 10x, how are you going to scale you when you have from 20 clients to 200 clients, right? That's a different mindset shift that gets them to see things in a different way.
I've interviewed a guy a couple of weeks ago who didn't bring in a CEO, he brought in a CFO. And he'd been doing his finance, and he said to me, I thought I was quite good at it. And his board took him to one side and said, you're good, but I think we need this. And he's like, no, resisted. And then he brought it in and he said, I wish I'd done it sooner. And I think it's probably the same thing for what CEOs do. They must sort of resist that change because they'll go, right, I'm bringing somebody who's going to bring in processes to my business that's all in my head and I can just go and do this. How do you work with them to move that process piece and go, hang on, it's actually, yes, it might slow it down for a week, but actually in 2 weeks' time, you're going to be so grateful. How does that work?
So part of it is not, in the beginning, it's not just with the founder business owner. It's also mostly with the team, because to be frank, in the beginning, the business owners bought in, right? They see that this is the solution that they need in order to give them what they want, right? So they're sold. They see that this is the light at the end of the tunnel. I literally have had some clients where it was either this or I didn't know what else I was going to do to throw in the towel. But at the end of the day, at the same time, what we're doing is we need buy-in from the entire organization. Because if Bob, the business owner, is on board and he knows what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how it's going to work, the rest of the organization is like, but what is this going to do to my role, right? And people are a little bit of skeptical, like, don't move my cheese. I like my lane, right? I like my dotting the I's and crossing the T's approach to what I'm doing. And so we need that sort of collective buy-in, if you will, not just from the founder, but also from the rest of the organization, so that we have the runway to initiate positive change. Because if the runway is not there, and if they're not willing to embrace doing things in a different way, there's going to be resistance and there's going to be pushback, and that's not going to be a recipe for success. So we get not just the founder on board, but we also get the rest of the team on board, so they see that it's a win for them, a win for the company, and also, yes, a win for the business owner. And like I said, part of that is that we step in and do that for you so you can see what the model looks like And then eventually we get them on board, involved, and they take some ownership.
One of the things you talk there is about having the wider team from the CEO and the leadership team and more people in the business. What do you think you helped the leadership team, not just the CEO?
From a leadership team perspective, there's a couple different things. Part of it is, again, in the beginning, we're not judging, we're kind of observing and assessing. In our experience with some companies, most of the time, there are a few red flags of what's not really working that's moving the needle. Number one, there's no real system for tracking metrics, KPIs, and having a dashboard. So that's one of the very first things that we bring in is a culture of tracking and owning numbers. That's the first thing. The second thing is there's no real consistent, effective leadership team meeting pulse. There may be team meetings. They may meet with Bob every now and then, but there's no real structure to them. They're really more kind of general status updates and kind of how are we doing here and how are we doing there, but there's no real culture of accountability. That's the second component. And then the third is really leveraging the leadership team so that they are responsible for leading, managing, and holding accountable their respective function within the organization. So this accountability culture is something that gets cascaded in a number of different ways, in tracking metrics and KPIs, and running and strategizing effective meetings where there's ownership and responsibility, and then creating this culture of accountability so people know what is their role, what is their responsibility, and how do we hold them accountable, not kind of babysit and not like dictate, but how do we hold them accountable so that they can raise the bar in terms of what they're doing and how they're performing. So those are three commonalities that really help on the leadership team level from where they sit, because obviously they're looking at the strategy as well as the execution, but oftentimes it's the scorecard, the metrics tracking, there's the running team meetings in an effective and efficient way, and then that culture of accountability that is the third component.
And you talk about that accountability piece. What does accountability look like in practice? We all see it in theory that you should, weekly check in and all that sort of thing. But actually, reality, how do teams take to that? Where does it fall in most businesses? Because that's not something you can put into every business, right?
Yeah. So accountability in our book equals ownership. So I'll give the example of tracking metrics, right? So let's say you have your weekly team leadership meeting. You've got your head of marketing, your head of sales, your head of ops, your head of finance. I'm generalizing, but let's say that is, you've got your COO who's running the meeting, and you've got your CEO. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. Doesn't really matter, but in this example. And then you've got your dashboard. You've got your what we call a scorecard or KPIs. And let's say you're looking at your marketing numbers and you have certain targets for each week. How many leads, how many prospects, how many clients being closed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's say that the number of leads that for a particular week is off. Like our goal is 10 leads a week. And for the last few weeks, it's been 5, 4, 3. Okay. So we're off track with that number. Why are we off track? But the most important question is who owns the number? Who owns the number so that they can own the solution as to why it's on track or off track? And that should be the person that owns the marketing box, right? Whether that's the marketing manager, the CMO, whatever that might be. But sometimes it's like, well, I'm not really sure who owns that because, Bill owns marketing, but Jill owns pay-per-click, and we're getting our leads from ads. So, but like at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Bill, you own marketing. You need to hold Jill accountable because that number impacts the deal flow in terms of how many leads are coming in. So we use the metrics to assign the ownership, which instills the accountability, because each week we're going to look at that number and say, are we on track or are we off track? And if we're on track, why? What's working? And if we're off track, why? What do we need to change, update, improve? And that is a question we're not asking conceptually. We're asking that question to Bill. Bill, you own marketing. So what's happening there? And I'm using that as an example across each function of the business. But I think at the end of the day, accountability implies ownership. And ownership can be really, really well orchestrated when you're tracking KPIs and metrics, but also getting very, very clear in terms of like, where's my lane? Right? In an entrepreneurial company, we all wear multiple hats, but sometimes we need to be very clear, like, this is my lane. These are my responsibilities. I own these responsibilities. I'm holding myself accountable to the output of those responsibilities because that's my job. That's what I'm here to do. But in some companies, when we step in, people aren't generally clear about their responsibilities. Like, I'm the marketing manager, but I also have a hand in sales, right? I'm in the sales box, but I also do delivery. Right. And there's no judgment, but sometimes it's like, okay, what's the lane? So that way with the lane, we can establish clear responsibilities. and from clear responsibilities, we can create that culture of accountability because you're on board, you know what you own, we're clear on what you own, and we're going to hold you accountable to make sure that the result is in place. So, but the metrics example is something that we do with every single company, regardless, especially in the beginning.
And just to go back to the KPIs, you talk about KPIs. You could put in KPIs for everything. You could KPI absolutely everything, right? And that you can then get yourself bogged down in data. I love data, but it could tell you the wrong thing as much as the right thing. So where do you think the balance is between the right amount of KPIs and the wrong amount of KPIs? Because there must be a sweet spot in your metrics, right?
Yeah, I think there's 3 different layers. If we talk about the CEO layer, it's typically 3 to 5 numbers every single week that give them the best pulse and snapshot on how the business is doing. And there's this, I don't remember which book it is from, but there's this analogy where if the CEO is stranded on a deserted island and the only way that they can get an idea of how their business is doing week after week are smoke signals that pump up into the air, those are the 3 to 5 numbers that matter the most, right? It could be number of clients, deals closed, cash in the bank, leads, whatever it might be. That's at a CEO level. At a leadership team level, it's the same 3 to 5 numbers, but for each function. 3 to 5 numbers for marketing, sales, right? So a little bit more detail, but we're not getting it all the way into the weeds. But we can't just look at, cash in the bank when we also need to be look at like how's our deal flow and how's our, onboarding percentage or whatever that might be. So the people that own those functions in the organization are responsible for developing what are the best 3 to 5 most important metrics to track each and every week. At a departmental level, you may have a pretty in-depth dashboard, right? One for marketing, a separate one for sales, a separate one for operations. And that's what the departments are running each and every week. And those could be pretty extensive, right? So for marketing, you may not just have leads, click-through rate, ad spend, cost per lead, or anything else. You might be tracking a lot more metrics that really feed into the overall pulse of how the marketing function is doing, because that's what's needed at the leadership team level. And then maybe one of those numbers, how many leads in the week, might be at the CEO level, but at the function level, they're probably getting into the details of all of the different things that are going into marketing, and you need to track a lot of those metrics. So it's kind of like big, medium, small, if you will, but the level of importance is just the same regardless at each level. It's just who's the audience that's involved in that discussion and how nitty gritty do you want to get into.
Going back to that analogy you put of the CEO on the desert island, if they were on that desert island, what are they still holding on to say, I want the smoke signal on that? What do you see as the most common thing that CEOs are saying, no, it's all right, I've got that? Is it the sales, or is it, or is it just depending on the CEO where their background is on?
Some cases sales, and I think for good reason. I mean, there's no better salesperson in the company than the business owner. So that doesn't mean they need to be doing all the sales, and they don't need to own the entire pipeline, but they should have a foot in sales. I also believe they should have a foot in marketing. That doesn't mean they're doing all the digital marketing things. There's a lot of things a business could be doing for marketing, but at the end of the day, there's only a handful of things that they actually should be doing. And there's only a small handful of those should be doing activities that the CEO should be doing, right? Networking, speaking, building relationships, partnerships. They should not be, maybe doing TikTok lives as an example, right? I'm just making stuff up. But operations is, I would say, one of the strongest because they have a pull from the perspective of I need to be involved, right? The clients are buying me. I need to, that's part of the delivery, right? That's part of the brand. That's part, I've just been doing it. And so I know it. Nobody can do it like me. Why would I give it to somebody else when I can do it faster, better, and more efficiently? So there's a little bit of a mindset tug with that one as well, because they feel like if they step out of the delivery and they really elevate themselves as a CEO leader in the company, where's the significance in that, right? Because the significance has always come from, I'm always available for my clients. I do all the delivery. My clients love me, right? And so there's a little bit of an identity shift that needs to happen from a delivery perspective. I'll say the number one, though, are the finances. Most CEOs in the very beginning hold the finances very close to their heart, either because, if I could just call it, there might be a bit of shame. There might be a bit of like, I'm going to open up this kind of mess that I put onto the table because, I've got a bookkeeper, but they're not great. And I don't like spending time with Joe, the bookkeeper, because all he wants to talk about are charts and graphs. And I just want the top line summary. Or my accountant is always late. So I never really have a good pulse on the financials. And I never really have a good perspective on where we're headed because there's no projections. The cash flow reports haven't been updated. They make mistakes. And so finances could be a little bit of like I'm not sure what the expression is, but the forgotten one, if you will. And because remember, the COO is your air traffic controller. So we can look at all aspects of the business. We can't close the eye to finances, especially if we're looking to grow and scale. We need to see what's going on, not like get in the books, but like again, what's working, what's not working. What is the story of the numbers that's telling us on how we can make decisions that's going to better the scale of the company? But sometimes in the beginning, that trust needs to be there for the CEO to let go of that and allow the COO to go in and kind of be in our zone of genius, which is to analyze and to do the research and to fact find and then distill that up to Bob and say, Bob, here's the story of what's going on in the numbers. And then from that story, Bob is now clear of how things are really going on from a financial perspective. And from the clarity, Bob starts to get a sense of confidence. And from the confidence, Bob can make better decisions, can take bigger risks in terms of where we're going. So sometimes the finances are things that are like, they really kind of hold on to that, rightfully so. I get it. But with some love and support and coaching, they start to see a different way, if you will.
And I suppose for most founders, it's probably their startup money that started it as well. So it's their own personal money, that first thing. Yeah. You just said there, though, like with some bit of coaching, a bit of helper, how do you move somebody from being that doer, Bob, let's go back to Bob, he's a very busy boy, that he's loading the van, he's doing the sales, he's uploading TikTok live, etc. How do you help him move from being that doer CEO to being the leader CEO that the business then needs?
I mean, it's first and foremost, it's a mindset shift. They need to be aware of the change that is required of them. And it's an identity change, right? They need to be a different CEO going forward. The CEO, I mean, really, it's basically going from business owner to CEO. And I know that we're kind of using the word interchangeably, but the business owner is then in the business, typically, right? They've got a big foot in marketing. They're doing some of the BD. They're in the delivery quite often. And unknowingly, they really love the delivery space because it feeds their craving for significance. Everybody has a desire to feel significant. And a lot of clients love to feel like they're available 24/7 to their clients. And their clients love them and they provide all the value. And I am the best person for that work. I get that. But you can't scale that, right? And oftentimes when you're in the epicenter of delivery, it can create some complexity because there are no SOPs. There are no operations manual. There is no proven playbook of how we do what we do because it all lives up here. And that can create complexity. You cannot scale complexity. You can scale simplicity. So the simplicity is getting Bob out of the model of the delivery and getting other mini Bobs or junior Bobs that are trained in the Bob way of doing things. And that is your methodology. That is your framework. And you can maybe rely on them to do 80% of the work. And maybe Bob shows up and brings his pixie dust magicness to the client relationship, but you don't have to be the one to bring it from A to Z all the time. So it is a mindset shift and shifting from business owner to CEO, which is really working in it to then be working on it. So yeah, I think it gets an identity. And then also it's a little bit of like pace, not race. Like we're not in here to try to change everything overnight. There's going to be progress, not perfection, right? So we look very carefully, very strategically of the things that you're holding on to. And part of that may be looking at what is the best use of your time in the business as an asset, just like we're looking at, Susan in finance as an asset in the business. What's the ROI there? Like, where is your time being spent and how is that really moving the needle? And we do some kind of activity inventory, kind of time exercises to see, where is their time going and where are the activities that Bob should be spending more time in that are really going to drive the scale of the business. I can share that as an example if you'd like, but I wanted to answer that question specifically.
No, that's really, really good. I mean, when you're moving the team from being a founder-led team to a sort of a bigger team rather than Bob and then that or flatter structure, what are the biggest sort of mistakes you see in businesses during that time? Because there must be the things that come up all the time in that process moving through it.
I think there's no real proven playbook of how they're doing things in some respect. We worked with an engineering company that was based out of Arizona for about a year and a half. Guy was doing about $2.5 million a year. Had a field of engineers. He wanted to grow, he wanted to scale, was probably booking 60 to 70 hours a week, was working 7 days a week, nights and weekends, no real vacation, always on the phone, et cetera. So there's like the tangible stuff that happens that, naturally kind of gets brought up to the surface, right? In terms of just like the operational bottlenecks of whether it's the founder that's so involved, but also the team just kind of going through and doing what they've always done because they've done what they've always done and the way they've always done it in some respect. And so when we started to kind of cascade, so where are your playbooks? Where are your operations manuals? How are you running your meetings? And how are we putting in what we did was a project management system. So there's a very clear roadmap of who is doing what, when, and how, if you will, right? So I'll give you an example. Like I run my company and the companies I've always worked with as their COO, my blood boils if I get a message from a team member that says, what should I be working on today? Because at the end of the day, so if you're familiar with a project management system called Asana or ClickUp or Monday.com or any of those, like our business runs on Asana. You know, I have a team of 25 people. Every single one of them know what to do day in and day out, not because I'm giving them direction, because it's built out as part of our roadmap in Asana, right? They don't know what to do. They know when it's due by. Our SOP is the how to do it. They know the why because they're part of my vision. They're part of the bigger mission. And yes, there might be a who component where they need to communicate or collaborate with others, but that's the blueprint. So when we created a structure like that in this client's business, it created a whole different roadmap of how to do things. Now, I'll use Bob as the name. I don't want to call him out by name, but Bob was not in Asana. I don't think that the founder should be in Asana in that way, but for the rest of the team, it created a completely different structure on how to do things, and that completely transformed the business. So as a result, he was actually able to not yes work less and maybe not work so hard on the evenings and weekends, but he also took like a vacation where he was not glued to his phone for like the first time in years. And it was a really, really good test to see how the team would perform without Bob in the office, because you never know how good your team is and how good your structure is unless they're by themselves when Bob's not around. So it kind of brought up the things that were working and not working great. Let's do another iteration. And that really started to shift things. But the challenges are just starting to initiate it. It's just trying to get them to take the first step. And for some companies, they're like, they see the idea of Asana and they're like, okay, this is going to be completely overwhelming. This is a whole other tool I have to use. And others are like, oh, I get it. I can really see how this is going to shift things dramatically for my business. So we just need some buy-in here and there from a couple key players, and we start to, maneuver them within the organization, and eventually it starts to take shape and get, further momentum.
You've seen businesses at different scales and scaling businesses through, small to multi-million. Are there sort of flag points where it's the hardest point to scale? The guy is talking about the finance, he brought the finance guy on. He said it was when he got past the 20th employee that he realized he didn't recognize somebody, or he didn't know about this job or anything like that. Where's the hardest point for scale in that you see?
That's an interesting question. To be honest, I'll speak from experience, right? Because I could have opinions on that in other ways, but in the companies that and I'll speak to it from a fractional model, right? Because I know when I've spoken to a lot of companies, they sometimes ask the question like, how does this work fractionally? I feel like I want, I want a full-time operator. You don't need a full-time operator in the business until you're probably at about 20 million. This is just from my experience. When you're at about 20 million, you've got a pretty sizable team, probably at the point where you've got some team members that maybe you don't know who they are because they've been onboarded by somebody else who's running HR. At that point, the idea of fractional it can work, but it may not be the right solution to get you to where you really want to go, right? But up to that point, fractional works really, really well. When it's the right fractional operator, not John that just kind of got thrown into the position because he was an ops the whole time and knows everybody and everything in the company. No. I mean, like that mindset, that skill set, those traits of a properly trained and skilled operator. But usually up to a point about 15 to 20 million, several dozen employees, the fractional model can work, and it can still work really, really well, not to mention the value of just not having to pay full time and the salary and benefits and everything else. After that point, full time probably applies. Because at that point, you've got real scalable operations. You're probably doing, multiple different verticals. You're not just in one particular lane. You're starting to really diversify. You've achieved a lot of the scale that gets the CEO to be the CEO that's not running the business. They've got that number two that's pretty much characterizing all of the day-to-day that's happening across the business. And you've got real ownership, right? Anything up to about 10 million, typically what happens is that the COO and or the CEO still has a pretty big foot in marketing, sales, operations, and finance. But after about 10 to 15 million, they're not in those seats at all. They are very compartmentalized, where you have a head of marketing, a head of sales, a head of operations, and a head of finance, or whatever the structure may be. But up to that point, the COO is still kind of like, I'm the COO, but I'm also kind of owning ops, right? Because we don't really have a strong ops manager that is leading and managing and holding the people, plans, projects, and processes accountable. So I'm doing it. or I've got a foot in marketing because, yeah, we have a marketing manager, but they're not really good at the strategy. So I'm kind of bringing in the strategy, but they're really good at the execution. But at a certain point, when things have started to dial in for scale at about 15 to 20 million and beyond, it's the shift from, say, a fractional model to a full-time model.
And you talk about scale. Are there businesses you've gone into, you're just going, we can't scale this? Do you know what I mean? They're just, it just isn't whatever. It's just not possible to do it, right?
Yeah, for sure. It usually depends on the market and or sometimes with the founder. There are some founders that say they want scale, but they really don't want to scale, right? They say they want it, but they're not willing to do the things that need to be in place to scale. And so that growth mindset is a huge criteria, because we are not stepping into a company just to maintain status quo. That's not exciting to us, right? That, like, we're looking to go from 2 to 5 in the next 12 to 18 months. Like that's our roadmap, right? Or 5 to 10 in the next 2 years, whatever that might be. So the mindset of a growth-minded entrepreneur needs to be in place. Number 2, they have to be willing to embrace change. They have to be willing to do things differently and kind of shift their mindset into the new identity of who they are going to be in their business, and accept that. And that means, again, you're not feeding your significant engine based on the delivery of the client work. You're feeding your significant engine because you're in that CEO box thinking about the vision and the future. And then in full honesty, there are some companies we've chosen not to work with because the market that they're in, there's too many factors that could work against them, right? In terms of whether they might be a nonprofit, or they've got, government contracts, or there's industry regulations. Like, they don't have the lane to be able to pivot and adapt and create as much as other companies. That doesn't mean they can't grow, but it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. And so sometimes we kind of, help them in some regards, but it's really more about building the structure and the foundation, but maybe we're not so much about 2xing the revenue. It's really about building the operational engine so it doesn't feel like it's so complicated, or just dialing in more of the profit because there's a lot of overhead. And also, I think for those that are kind of more mission driven in some respect, there's some companies where it's like, I don't know if that's something I want to be a part of, right? I mean, you get that. It's just something that really kind of lights us up, where I'm like, I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of the ripple effect of what we're doing beyond just kind of, creating change for scale.
If you could go into any of the businesses you've gone into and only do one thing, whatever that, you could pick that one thing. What's the sort of most common thing you would go in on day one and go, is it, structure change? Is it software change? What do you think makes the most impact in something?
It's a really good question. I would say the first thing is to get the founder excited about their vision again. Because I think when we come in and they're at the point where they've lost the excitement because they can't spend the time on the vision anymore because they're too bogged down in the day-to-day. So I think if we can do some of the conversations and some of that strategic thought partner, communication that allows them to think more of why they're in the business that they're in, and almost kind of embrace the fact that they're not the best operator for their business. And that allows them to be more excited and more aligned in their vision and where they see the future going. I think that's exciting for us because it's exciting for them, right? If we go in and just start talking about, tactics and to-do lists and where your time is going, like we do that. But in the very beginning, it's just a really big mindset shift of where they want to be focused on with the vision of their business and the why that goes around with that.
If somebody listening today has gone, right, I want to move to this place where I'm going to bring a COO. As a CEO, what do you need to adopt, and what are they sort of the principles in your mindset do you need to change?
I think they need to understand a couple of things. I think number one, like I mentioned, accountability. They have to embrace the fact that a culture of accountability might be a significant shift in the way that they run the organization. And as a result of that, that may impact some key players in the company. With some companies that we've worked with, not all, but in some cases, most of the time, there is some team member or some team members that are not willing to change. There's a little bit of a resistance. There's going to be an objection. And the founder needs to be comfortable in making the decision that, listen, we're not coming in, and if Susie is going to be, I don't want to say a challenge or a problem, but if Susie's not going to be on board, our objective is not to go in and to push Susie out. But it might be a exercise on clarifying, is Susie really the right person in the right seat? And if we were to free up Susie to be in a different seat that's going to be better suited for her skills and responsibilities, and it fits more like a glove as opposed to like fitting a square peg in a round hole, great. Then we've done a win for Susie. But at the same time, it might actually bring to the surface of the conversation that maybe Susie is not the right person for the right seat. And we can try to get her to be that right person. But sometimes that might mean Susie exits because the team that got you there is not the team that may get you to where you want to go. I think the founder needs to be comfortable in making some tough decisions because he likes Susie. Bob likes Susie. They've worked together for a long time, right? There's some pros there, but there also might be some cons there. And so being able to make the tough decisions around team, I think, is number one. And that comes from that culture of accountability. I think the other thing is being a model for the rest of the organization. So if we're creating a process-driven company, not a person-driven company, then, Bob needs to embrace process. Doesn't mean he needs to be process-oriented all the time, but he needs to kind of shout from the rooftops, hey, guys, process is really important because it allows us to scale. So he can't say one thing and then kind of hide away and do something different because that sets an example or a model for the company that, they can't really relate to. Those are probably two things that matter the most. And I would say probably as well, just like I mentioned with the metrics and KPIs, like embracing the idea that numbers really, really are the pulse of how your business is doing. And developing a mindset around like, what you track, you attract. And the story of the numbers tells the story of the business, and being able to, and again, we're not talking charts and spreadsheets and everything else, but just key numbers and really being able to make some decisions and having awareness and insight from those numbers is exceptionally important for the mindset of a CEO to embrace as we're doing this in a new way.
And do you find, like, as the businesses you work with, if the CEO has been protective over their numbers, do you find opening the numbers to the rest of the business helps them or helps the rest of the team more?
It helps them. It may not help the rest of the team directly because they typically don't want to share the whole numbers with most of the team. But, I think if they're confiding in the COO, like, again, that's why that COO is your strategic thought partner. They are like the person on your shoulder. I often sometimes use the word, they might be like your consigliere, right? The things that you can confide in them, that you can really share. Like, listen, I know the P&L last quarter was really, really bad, but I also know that next quarter we've got these new deals coming in. Like, okay, we can talk about that. We can strategize that. But I think they feel heard when they can kind of share and kind of put it on the table with no judgment. They can talk it through, right? What's good, what's bad, the good, bad, the ugly. Like, there's, again, no judgment. Let's kind of discuss that. That's hard for a founder to do in front of the entire finance team or in front of the entire leadership team, because those leadership team members are then going to be like, oh, wow, things aren't as good as Bob always says they are. And wow, I didn't know that, like, our profit was this, and that's a lot of money that's going to Bob. Like, I want to, ask more money. Like, that's somewhat of like an employee mindset to think of things in that way when they look at the finances. The COO doesn't look at things in that way. They get it from Bob's perspective, but they also get it from the team member's perspective. So they can relate to it in both ways, but oftentimes it's just the nature of sharing it. They can breathe a little bit easier. They can kind of feel, it's not so heavy. It's not just living. We have a client of ours. We just started working with them last month. A guy in Virginia. He does a $7.5 million a year building that creates the scaffolding that gets attached to buildings in the cities when they're doing construction work. Didn't know the business existed? Of course it does. They're the ones that create the scaffolding, right? $7.5 million a year. Guy's got a manufacturing factory, engineers, production lines, inventory. He's got a team of 25. It's a family business. He's been working at this business for 35 years. Never got above 7.5 million. That's the glass ceiling. Never got above it. No matter what he did, how he did it, never changed. His wife is the bookkeeper. Nobody else in finance. Nobody else, other than maybe their accountant that files the taxes, and that's pretty much it. Everything else in the finances, she doesn't like doing the finances. She just does it because she's always balanced the checkbook. I'm being completely honest, for their personal life. Everything else in the finances lives up here, not in spreadsheets, not in a Google Drive, not in a forecasting spreadsheet, not in a tool, nothing. It's all up here. Every time he sees a check, he kind of mentally computes it. When he gets the payroll check, he mentally computes it, because the bookkeeping gets done like every other month. And there's usually mistakes because the wife doesn't love to do it. So, like, giving him the space to say, like, listen, and that was one of our objectives, right? Is like, listen, we need to fix what was the objective we created? As something about like stabilize the finance function for scale, right? You can't scale a business at 7.5 million when the finance function lives in the founder's head. And so part of that was just giving him the space to be like, let's open the books and let's kind of go in and really, really see. Then the COO went through and started to ask the questions non-judgingly. What's working? What's not working? Tell me about this. Okay, there's a lot of overhead. The overhead's actually not in inventory. The overhead is in staff. And if we actually ramped up our delivery timeline from close of sale to onboarding with new project from, say, 28 days to 15 days, that addresses your cash flow issue, right? It's a timing thing. It's not a budgetary thing. So those types of things he just couldn't make sense of because it was all living up in here and like one big garbled mess. So I think to answer your question with the finances, it's a lot of just being able to kind of put it out there on the table and talk through, which can feel like half of the solution is just expressing it.
Because you've got the data to back up that actually you've got 50 staff who are all working part-time, well, working full-time, but yeah, absolutely. Do you think, this has come to me whilst listening to you talk about it, do you think a really good CEO can make the CEO basically redundant? Not from the figurehead point of view, but from a good CEO can come in and go, right, you just need to do the handshake and open the door. That's all you need to do, sort of type thing.
It does exist. It can, for sure. I think depending upon the level of scale and maturity that's in place. But yeah, I mean, there are some companies that we work with where we're focused on the scale, and the founder CEO doesn't really want to be involved, right? They just that's not their their sweet spot. That's not their zone of genius. And so the good thing is that there's a lot of delegation and a lot of trust to the COO, but the COO also has to keep in mind, like, they are not the business owner, right? So at the end of the day, there is that distinction, and like, I can make some decisions and you've empowered me to make those decisions on your behalf, but I'm not sure if I'm confident enough to make every single decision, right? So if it's a legal thing, you got to get the CEO involved, right? If it's a big financial decision with a partner, you got to get the CEO involved. Sometimes they lean too heavily on the COO to make a lot of those decisions. And we have to be careful. We have this one situation with one particular client where there's a little bit of pushback and be like, that's not a COO decision, that's a CEO decision. But that allows them to feel really good that they cannot be involved in a lot of the other decisions and only be involved in decisions that they actually need to be involved.
And I think it's I've seen those businesses grow and seeing those people move on, and it is almost like a refreshment for them. You can see the weight, as you said, like the financial side. You can see this weight go, oh, I don't have to worry about that. And the guy I had on before was like, I don't need to worry. I can think about the long-term strategy, and that's fun. I don't need to worry about all those things, which is really good. Just moving on to you, Derek, what sort of lessons have you learned through your career that you sort of, somebody coming back to you, coming back and saying, I've got one thing, Derek, tell me one thing about that you've learned over your career. What sort of thing would you give that as your biggest lesson?
I mean, the biggest lesson that I've learned, I think I have a unique perspective because I've been that COO operator for, 15, 17 years. I'm an operator at heart. I'm wired like an operator. I think in process and structure, but I also, I own my own business. So I have that kind of entrepreneurial mindset, not just in launching my own company, but also in working with entrepreneurs. So I can kind of think about things in both perspectives. And I think for those that are listening that may not know that there is a different mindset that exists between an operator and a business owner. And that in most cases, in my experience, in my opinion, business owners are not the ones to be running their own companies. That can feel like a big shift. And it kind of like can hit them because they're like, but it's my business. Who else would run my business? Well, it doesn't mean that you are running your business involved in all of the activities. Like, where are the things that are going to be the most important? So I think the distinction is that when I speak to potential companies and clients, and they realize, like, I didn't even know that you guys existed. Like, this idea of a COO is kind of like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This sounds like too good to be true. But that's because there is this unique skill set and kind of identity and strength zone of the people that love to run other people's companies. They are wired for the backstage. They don't crave the front stage. The founder creates the front stage. They don't love the backstage. So when you have this like yin and yang, as I said before, it can really, really be like 1 + 1 = 3. But I think for the business owner to realize, and this is what I've observed, is that when they know that that is okay for them to step out of their own way of trying to run their business on their own. And I'm not saying give the keys to the kingdom to somebody else and relinquish control, but to have that partner that's alongside you, right? If you look at, Apple or Microsoft or whatever, you had the front stage guy. There was also the backstage guy. It's the same dynamic. You had the visionary, you had the operator, right? And so I think it's the same that applies to a company that's doing 5 million in turnover or 15 million or 1.5. It's the same dynamic that can really help shift the perspective of how to scale a company, so it's not just on the shoulders of the founder all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, it's removing that weight. That's the important thing.
Exactly. It's the sometimes it's the okay, I feel relief. Wow, this feels good. We want that feeling to come about for sure.
And we see, general one more question from the back of that. We see the burnout piece. You must see that in the CEOs. That sort of the sleep. I've got a health tracker ring. Yeah. The stress must disappear, right? That must be a big important thing for the CEOs to understand. That burnout is disappearing, or to try and stop that burnout piece.
It's the indirect byproduct. They don't necessarily. Some cases they do. They come to us because like burnout, they can see it or they've experienced it, and like that is the tunnel that they're headed in. So they're trying to get out of the dark tunnel and go into the light end of the tunnel, but it's driven by the growth and the scale and everything else. But the byproduct of that, or the indirect benefit that they sometimes realize, is not just they get their quantity of time back, but they get the quality of their time back. And the quality is sometimes, because most entrepreneurs, they love to work, right? They're still going to get themselves busy enough at other activities, but it's the quality of where they're being busy that sometimes can shift. And the quality could be, actually, you're not busy in your business. You might be spending quality time with your family, right? So that example I talked about earlier where the guy was doing 60 to 70, I mean, that was burnout channel. Like he was already on that train. But when he went, I remember, because lives in the US, I won't say where, but lives in the US, and he went to like a Grand Prix race somewhere with his buddies, I think in Dubai, for like 4 or 5 days, and literally like no phone, no laptop, no email, no Slack, no nothing. He hadn't done that in years. And what was great is he came back and he's like, I got to do that again. So that was another motivator for the growth and scale, was like being able to take those extended periods of time away from the business and not feel like you have to be so relied on. And it's just a completely different perspective. So that's that byproduct. I think that's really helpful, in addition to the tangibles, the growth, the scale, the financials, of course. But it's that quality of time back that is a huge component.
And there's, you can't ever get that time back in a different way. It's been fantastic talking to you, Derek. Thank you so much for joining us. Lots of really good lessons to learn, and lots of more about the role of the COO. As we finish all podcasts on this show with some rapid fire questions, hopefully, I know which one of them. I know exactly what you're going to say the answer to. So because you said it twice in the interview. But are you an Apple or Android user?
Oh, definitely Apple.
Great. Social media. We talked about live TikToks, but what's your social media platform of choice for using?
LinkedIn, 100%.
Are you a beach or city break person?
Oof, that's tough because I live in Paris, so I love the city, but I also but I grew up in the water. So I'm going to say, I'm going to say it depends. If it's in summer, I'd love to be by the water. But if it's any time outside of that, I actually prefer to be in the mountains. I'm going to throw in a different answer. I'm a huge skier, so my sweet spot is always in the French Alps skiing.
Can't beat that. Town or country? You've probably just given it away, right? So, would you rather live there?
Yeah, town.
Are you somebody who travels first class, or would you save the money?
That's a good question, man. That depends. If I'm going local here, not first class, but if it's something to going back to the US, in order to get the good night's sleep, it might be an upgrade.
I always allow people the option of saying, if it's my money or the business's money.
Yes,
it's your own business. This is a slightly different world.
Yeah.
Are you a morning or night person?
Morning person.
Is exercise important to you or not?
Yes.
Would you rather innovate or improve?
I'm going to make sure these are one-word answers, or am I supposed to expand on?
No, you can expand. You can expand on it. If
you say rapid fire, I'm like, they're coming at me, and I'm like, okay, I think it was because it was like Apple Android, but I wasn't going to expand anymore.
No, that's fine. Innovate, or would you rather innovate, or would you improve?
Improve.
I know what you're going to say here. Would you challenge the status quo or not to challenge? But hey, that's your role, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know about that one. Because again, I consider myself to be somewhat risk averse. So I'm not one to really kind of push the challenge, the status quo. It's part of what we do. But if I'm being honest, I don't like to really kind of push the status quo in that way. I like to like to preserve, I like to stabilize. But in the work that we do, yes, we are there to challenge like the status quo of how they're running their business. Yeah.
Fine. And finally, I'm at a bar. Have you moved from the France way of drinking or the American way? What's your drink of choice?
I would say a pastis in the south of France on a hot summer day.
Very good. Very good. Derek, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Ben.
We've had a few little problems
in
in recording of it.
That was really good. You had me on the spot there for a few of those.
It throws people. It does throw people. Those questions. They actually become the hardest questions that people have to answer sometimes in the whole podcast. Yeah. But thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Derek, for joining us today on the Business Takeaway podcast. I hope you, if you're a business owner, took something away from that. You might not be in a place where the COO is an important role for you, but you might also be in that world. So to learn the lessons and the pitfalls and how that can be improved, I hope it gave you some great pointers in that area. If this is the first episode you've listened to on the show, it'd be a great help if you would hit the subscribe or the like button so you get more of the episodes. We've got plenty of back episodes for you to go and listen to. And of course, we've got plenty more episodes coming in the near future. As I said, if you could hit that like and subscribe, and if you can give us a review, more stars, of course, the better, and leave us a little word review as well. It helps this program grow and helps us get more guests on the show. But for now, I just want to thank you for listening today, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you on the next episode.